That morning, Victor slid a single sheet of paper across the conference table like he was handing me a parking ticket, not gutting the income I'd built over 10 years. No explanation, no conversation, just a smug shrug and a new number that erased half my life overnight. I walked out of that room feeling small, humiliated, treated like I was disposable, like none of the work I created ever mattered. But they didn't know the part of the story I hadn't told anyone yet. Before we begin, please subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Victor called me upstairs at 9:12 a.m., a time I learned to dread because it usually meant someone was about to be scolded, replaced, or quietly erased. The conference room looked the same as always. Over-polished wood table, faint smell of citrus cleaner, and that flickering overhead light no one ever bothered to fix, as if the whole place had decided my presence didn't matter enough for maintenance. Victor sat at the head of the table in a chair that cost more than my monthly rent, leaning back like a man preparing to deliver news he'd been rehearsing. He didn't even gesture for me to sit. He just nudged a single cream-colored sheet of paper forward with 2 fingers, eyes already drifting back to his phone. I picked it up, confused. The first thing I noticed was the number 80,000. The second thing I noticed was that my current salary, $160,000, wasn't listed anywhere. No comparison, no justification, just the downgrade. I felt my heartbeat thud in my ears as I scanned the corporate jargon about structural recalibrations and market efficiency realignments. A pile of words that looked professionally printed but meant nothing except, "You're lucky we're not firing you." I swallowed. "You're cutting my salary in half?" He didn't even look up. "We're adjusting your compensation to reflect your true market value. And frankly, Aubrey, you should be grateful to still have a role here. Most R&D programs are getting downsized across the industry." He finally lifted his eyes, and the smirk that followed made my stomach tighten, the kind of expression men like him wore when they thought they'd cornered you. "Your royalty arrangement is no longer valid, by the way," he added, casually flipping his phone over. It took a second for the words to land. "My royalty? What do you mean, invalid?" It was an informal understanding with previous leadership, nothing binding. That informal understanding was a handshake agreement with Eleanor Vance, the founder's daughter, the same woman who had promised I'd share the reward if my formulations ever made real money. They had made money, millions. My peptide complexes were the backbone of Celeriderm's entire rebrand, the reason their quarterly numbers shot up for 3 years straight. And now, with a single shrug, Victor was erasing all of it as if my work were a mistake he was correcting. "The renewal line uses my formulations," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The brightening treatment, the overnight serum, everything you've been marketing as the company's scientific breakthrough. Those are company assets," he snapped, "created on company time using company resources. Don't start overestimating your role here." I felt something inside me tighten, a coil pulling back. Not anger yet, just clarity, cold and sharp. He tapped the paper again. "Sign the acknowledgement. HR will process the change, or don't sign, and we'll process your exit instead. Your choice." My chair squeaked when I finally sat down, a pathetic sound compared to the silent luxury he sat in. I read the page again, the flickering light reflecting off the cream-colored surface, and realized something important. This wasn't a discussion. This wasn't even a demotion. It was a humiliation. A message from Victor that he thought he owned me. That he thought he owned everything I had ever created. I set the paper down. I didn't sign it. And in that moment, without saying a word, I made the decision that would destroy his entire career. I walked out of that conference room without looking back, the unsigned paper still sitting in front of Victor like an unanswered insult. My hands were steady, but inside, something felt cracked open. Not broken, just different. The kind of shift that happens when humiliation burns hot enough to reveal the truth beneath it. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. Every step down toward the basement lab felt like peeling away another layer of the lie I had lived under for years. Celeriderm liked to pretend its research wing was state-of-the-art, but that was only true upstairs. Down where I worked, the paint peeled in thin curls at the corners, the heating vents rattled in the winter, and the only window was a tiny rectangle at floor level that looked out onto a patch of gravel and a forgotten cigarette butt. My space was never meant to be a lab. The company had converted it from an old storage room back when Eleanor still ran things and believed innovation didn't require marble floors. I unlocked the door, flicked on the lights, and inhaled the familiar blend of solvents, sterilizing alcohol and low-grade ventilation. It wasn't glamorous, but at least down here the equipment didn't lie to me. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. Pipettes arranged by size, centrifuge humming from the work I started that morning. My notebook opened to a page filled with ratios I had spent weeks testing. That notebook had been with me longer than Celeriderm, a green graph paper journal I'd bought during my graduate program at the University of Colorado, long before the company had even known my name. I reached for it, lifting it like something fragile. My entire scientific life was inside these pages. My peptide stability models, my early failures, my first breakthrough with ceramide delivery. All of it, in my handwriting. No company lawyer, no corporate restructuring, no arrogant COO could change that. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed something I had forgotten. A date written at the bottom of one of the earliest formulations. It was months before my first day at Celeriderm. My breath caught for a moment as a memory from that year surfaced. Me sitting in a cramped apartment, surrounded by textbooks, determined to build something that could actually change the market one day. I had walked into this company already knowing how to build the thing they ultimately profited from. They had only provided the tools, not the ideas, and tools weren't ownership. I ran my fingers down the edge of the notebook and felt an unexpected calm settle in. Victor thought he had cornered me because he thought Celeriderm owned my mind, but this notebook was proof they didn't. I sat down at my workstation, opened my laptop, and began photographing each page. Not out of panic, not out of fear, out of certainty. I didn't know my exact next move yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever came after this moment would not belong to Celeriderm. And that basement lab, the one they stuck me in and forgot about, was about to become the birthplace of the decision that would unravel everything they believed they controlled. When I finished photographing the last page of my notebook, I closed it gently, the way someone closes a chapter they know they'll never reopen in the same way again. I didn't pack my things in a dramatic fury. There was no slammed door, no raised voice, no tears. I moved with the kind of quiet certainty that scares people far more than rage. A cardboard box sat near the recycling bin, half crushed on one side. I reshaped it as best I could and began placing my belongings inside. My backup goggles, the mug that said Beaker Babe, the succulent Eleanor gave me years ago after I stabilized my first formulation for the company. I hesitated a second before placing the succulent in the box. It was the only thing here that ever made me feel seen. When everything was ready, I turned off the light, leaving the lab humming in darkness, and walked toward HR. Monica looked up as I entered. She pushed her glasses up her nose, confused at the sight of my box. "Aubrey? You leaving early?" "Leaving permanently," I said, setting the unsigned paperwork on her desk. She blinked a few times like her brain was buffering. Wait, did you talk to Victor?" He said, "Tell him I'm not signing anything." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I didn't wait for the rest. I walked out of that building the same way I walked in on my first day, alone and unnoticed, but this time with something they didn't expect: the truth about what belonged to me. The afternoon air in Denver was cold, sharp enough to sting when I inhaled. My car door groaned the same way it always did, but this time the sound didn't annoy me. It sounded like freedom, however small. I drove home without music, just the sound of snowmelt splashing under the tires. My mind was strangely calm, not racing, not panicking. Humiliation had burned away the fog and left clarity in its place, a clarity I didn't know I was capable of. When I got home, I put the box on the kitchen counter, made a pot of coffee, and opened my laptop. The first thing I pulled up was my employment contract. I read every line, every clause, every piece of corporate language they'd used to protect themselves, and that was when I saw it, the thing that changed the entire trajectory of everything that happened next. My non-compete clause prohibited me from being employed by a direct competitor. It said nothing about licensing intellectual property I already owned, nothing about consulting, nothing about offering exclusive rights to formulations that originated from my graduate research. I wasn't boxed in. I was unlocked. That realization pulsed through me like electricity. I opened a new tab and began listing every skincare company with the financial power and distribution reach to threaten Solera 15 companies at first. Then I eliminated the ones too small, too chaotic, or too wrapped up in acquisitions. That left 3, but one stood out immediately. North River Skincare Corp., Chicago-based, established in retail, respected in clinical trials, but notoriously weak in peptide therapy. They had tried and failed to crack the anti-aging market multiple times. Their analysts were constantly criticizing their lack of a flagship product. If anyone needed what I had and had the power to use it to crush Solera, it was North River. I stared at their website, my cursor hovering over the contact directory. This was the moment in any normal life where a person steps back, questions themselves, wonders if this is too risky, too bold, too unthinkable. But humiliation has a way of erasing hesitation. I clicked on Executive Leadership. My eyes landed on a name, Dr. Selena Hart, Chief Innovation Officer. I wrote the email directly with no attachment, no formula screenshots, nothing that could be stolen, just enough information to get her attention. My fingers moved without pause. Dr. Hart, my name is Aubrey Lane. Until today, I served as the Senior Formulation Architect at Solera Labs. I developed the peptide complexes that generate the majority of their revenue. My employment ended, and I retain ownership of the foundational intellectual property. If you're open to discussing exclusive licensing rights, I'm available to talk. I reread it once, then hit send. It was 8:04 p.m. I expected silence for at least a day. I expected my message to get buried under corporate noise or drowned in spam filters. But at 8:21 p.m., my phone buzzed. One new email. Aubrey, thank you for reaching out. Can you be in Chicago tomorrow afternoon? That was the moment I knew my quiet exit wasn't an ending. It was the opening move in a game. Solera didn't even realize they had already lost. I barely slept that night. Not out of fear or nerves, but something closer to momentum. Like my mind had already taken a running leap into the next phase, and my body was trying to keep up. By morning, the snow had stopped, leaving a thin crust of ice on my windows. I packed a small suitcase, grabbed my notebook, and booked the earliest flight to Chicago. No hesitation, no backward glance. At the airport, everything felt strangely muted, like I was walking through someone else's life. The line at security, the boarding announcements, the white noise of passengers complaining, none of it touched me. My focus stayed on the email from Dr. Hart. Her response had been precise, almost surgical. No wasted words. That told me she understood leverage, timelines, and the scent of opportunity. When the plane touched down at O'Hare, the sky looked like brushed steel. I took a rideshare straight to North River's headquarters. 20 stories of glass and dark metal rising over the river like it had something to prove. Inside, the air smelled faintly of eucalyptus, not because they were trying to impress anyone, but because someone here actually cared about creating a space that helped people think. A receptionist handed me a visitor badge and directed me to the 17th floor. When the elevator doors opened, Dr. Selena Hart was already waiting for me. She didn't offer a stiff corporate handshake. She shook my hand like a scientist shakes hands with another scientist, firm, focused, no pretense. Aubrey, she said, thank you for coming, labs this way. That was the first sign she respected me. She didn't drag me to a conference room filled with stale muffins and overpolished executives. She brought me to where real work happened. The North River Lab was the opposite of Solera basement dungeon. Bright, spacious, air that actually circulated. Even the equipment seemed to hum with a cleaner, sharper pitch. She led me to a private testing area. Show me what you've got, she said. I set my notebook on the stainless steel table and opened it to the first page of the peptide stability progression. My handwriting curved across the graph paper, dense but organized. Years of trial and error, refinement after refinement, patterns only I fully understood. Selena leaned over the pages, and I watched her expression sharpen. Not shock, not jealousy, recognition. She saw the science for what it was, a breakthrough Solariderm never deserved to profit from. "You developed this before they hired you," she said. Not a question, but confirmation. "Yes, my thesis is time-stamped 3 months before my contract with them." She nodded once. "And the contract?" "Gives them usage rights, nothing else." Selena didn't smile, but something in her posture changed, an inaudible click of pieces falling into place. "Walk with me," she said. She took me to an executive suite where 3 people waited: a legal counsel named Brian, a product strategist named Mira, and North River's CEO, Damian Brooke. Damian looked younger than I expected, early 40s, confident in the way someone is when they understand the scale of the table they're sitting at. "Ms. Lane," he said, "I hear you might be holding the missing piece we've been chasing for years." I sat, notebook still in hand. No fear, no shame. I explained what I built, how Solariderm mishandled it, and how their arrogance had blinded them to the power they never truly owned. Brian took notes rapidly. Mira watched me with a kind of hunger only someone in product development understands. Damian steepled his fingers and asked the question that mattered. "What are you offering?" "Exclusive licensing rights," I said. "All existing formulations and future advancements." "And your terms?" I had practiced the number on the plane, rolling it over in my mind until it felt real. 11 million up front, 6% net royalties, directorship title with full lab autonomy. No one laughed, no one winced. They exchanged glances, calculating silently. Damian finally said, "Give us a moment." They stepped out. I stayed seated, staring at the Chicago skyline through the window. 30 minutes later, they returned. Damian held out his hand. 9 million up front, 6% royalties, Director of Advanced Innovation, and immediate onboarding, pending legal review. It wasn't exactly my number, but it was close enough to taste victory. I shook his hand. The moment our palms met, I knew Solariderm had no idea what was coming. The moment I stepped out of North River's building, the wind cut across the Chicago riverfront like a blade, but I barely felt it. My mind was already spinning through the next steps, what evidence I needed lined up, which documents had to be reviewed, which parts of my life were about to change. I took a cab to my hotel, a modest place near the Loop, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the business card. Brian, the legal counsel, had slipped into my hand before I left. "Call this number tonight," he'd said. "She's the best IP attorney in the Midwest. Independent, not tied to us. You'll want her." That alone told me North River wasn't playing games. They wanted this clean, they wanted it airtight, and they wanted Solariderm to choke on their own ignorance. I dialed the number. A woman answered on the second ring. "This is Attorney Meredith Shaw." Her voice was calm, steady, like she'd already handled a dozen corporate fires that day, and mine was simply the next log. I explained the situation in precise terms. My thesis, my formulations, the sequence of development, the contract language, the attempted salary cut, the dissolved handshake agreement, the notebook I'd maintained since grad school. She listened without interrupting, which I took as a sign she was all ready, building the case in her head. "Send me copies of your thesis, your notebook scans, and your employment contract," she said. "I'll call you back within 24 hours. True to her word, she called the next morning at 9:03. "Aubrey," she said, "you're in the clear. More than clear, actually." She walked me through the details. The timestamp on my thesis predating my employment by months. The absence of any IP transfer clause in the Solariderm contract. The legal distinction between usage rights and ownership rights, and the fact that the refinements I made at Solariderm were derivative of the original independent research, not new intellectual property created under the company's umbrella. "They'll try to argue you refined the formulations on their time," she said, "but they can't prove the foundational innovation belongs to them." So North River is safe to license from me? Safe, she said, and strategically brilliant. I hung up and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since Victor slid that paper across the table, something inside me settled. Not relief, validation. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of email exchanges, contract drafting, and late-night calls with North River's team. Every line was inspected, tightened, reinforced. By noon on the third day, we were ready. Damien scheduled a signing meeting in his office, the skyline sprawling behind him like a silent witness. I read every clause, every sub-clause, confirming the language matched exactly what I wanted. When we reached the signature line, my hand didn't shake. I signed. Damien countersigned. Brian notarized the documents, stamped them, and slid a copy into a folder with my name embossed on it. The wire will hit within the hour, Damien said. Welcome to North River. In the elevator, my phone buzzed with a bank notification. $9 million transferred into my account. A number that didn't look real. A number that erased every moment Victor had made me feel replaceable. I should have savored the moment longer, but my phone vibrated again, this time with a number I recognized. Solara Derm's HR line. I let it ring. Then it buzzed again and again, 5 missed calls, a voicemail. I didn't need to listen to know what was happening. They'd finally realized what my silence meant. Back in Denver, the panic was beginning, but the real explosion hadn't even started. I checked out of the hotel, boarded my flight home, and leaned back in my seat. Solara Derm had no idea they'd just declared war on the wrong person. 2 days after I returned to Denver, the first legal blow landed. A thick envelope arrived at my apartment, stamped with Solara Derm's logo, and the kind of aggressive legal language companies use when they're panicking but pretending they aren't. They accused me of theft of trade secrets, unlawful dissemination of proprietary formulations, breach of loyalty, and a handful of other accusations clearly crafted in a conference room filled with sweaty executives who didn't fully understand what they were claiming. I forwarded it to Meredith. She called me 5 minutes later. They filed too quickly, she said, sounding almost amused. They jumped without a strategy. This is sloppier than I expected. A court date was set. A preliminary injunction hearing. If Solara Derm won, North River would have to freeze development on everything that came from my formulations. If they lost, the momentum would swing permanently in our favor. The morning of the hearing was cold enough to sting my lungs. I arrived at the courthouse early, wearing a black coat and carrying nothing but my notebook and a folder Meredith told me to bring. We met on the courthouse steps. "Look composed," she murmured. "They're going to come in hot." She wasn't wrong. Solara Derm's legal team stormed in like they were auditioning for a courtroom drama, matching suits, rolling carts of binders, and an arrogance so thick you could smell it. And behind them, looking unnervingly small without his polished office backdrop, was Victor. His confidence was gone, replaced by a tight-jawed anxiety that looked almost foreign on him. He avoided my eyes. We entered the courtroom. The judge was a woman in her 60s with short gray hair, sharp glasses, and the demeanor of someone who'd seen every corporate tantrum imaginable. The hearing began with Solara Derm's attorney, an overly animated man who gestured so wildly he knocked over his own water bottle, arguing that I had taken the core intellectual assets of the company and handed them to a competitor. Ms. Lane's actions pose immediate and irreparable harm to Solara Derm's market position, he insisted. Her formulations are the foundation of our flagship products. Meredith rose slowly, like she had all the time in the world. "Your Honor," she began, "Solara Derm cannot claim ownership of something it never owned." She handed the judge a packet containing the first 10 pages of my graduate thesis, highlighted, time-stamped, archived, and authenticated by the university. Then she handed over the employment contract, meticulously labeled. "This contract grants Solara Derm usage rights only," she continued. "There is no clause transferring ownership of Ms. Lane's prior intellectual property, and the foundational formulations predate her employment by months." The judge flipped through the documents. Then she looked directly at Solara Derm's attorney. "Counsel," she said, "do you have a signed IP transfer agreement?" The attorney blinked. Your Honor, the employment agreement— That is not what I asked, she said, cutting him off. Do you have a signed IP transfer? No, Your Honor. The judge turned to Meredith. Continue. Meredith showed the evolution of my formulations through notebook entries. Dated, clear, independent. Then she revealed the final piece. Solariderm's own internal documentation obtained legally, showing insufficient formulation detail to recreate the product. They never required Ms. Lane to submit full independent research notes, she said, because they did not own them. Solariderm's attorney tried to pivot, arguing that improvements made during my employment belonged to the company. Meredith countered with case law, scientific precedent, and the fact that derivative refinement does not equate to foundational ownership. The judge listened, and when both sides finished, she leaned back, tapped her pen twice, and spoke. The evidence overwhelmingly suggests Ms. Lane retains ownership of her foundational work. Solariderm's request for an injunction is denied. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Victor's face drained of color. The judge continued. If Solariderm wishes to pursue damages, you may proceed to a full trial, but there will be no emergency relief granted today. The gavel hit wood. It felt louder than it should have. Outside the courtroom, Meredith allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. That, she said, was them falling off a cliff. And she was right, because once the injunction was denied, North River moved at lightning speed. Within weeks, they launched the first line of products made from my formulations. Improved, stabilized, perfected in their labs. The market reacted immediately. Beauty reviewers called the new serum a category reset. Retailers reported sellouts within days. Influencers praised the texture, the scent, the visible results. Meanwhile, Solariderm spiraled. Without access to the complete formulations, their new batches separated, destabilized, oxidized. Customers complained. Retailers demanded returns. Medical consultants dropped them. Their stock fell 21% in the first quarter, then 30%, then 40%. And on a gray Thursday morning, I woke up to a news alert. Solariderm announces leadership restructuring amid performance crisis. Victor's name wasn't in the article, because they don't print the names of people who've already been erased. When I arrived at North River's headquarters later that afternoon, the VP of Strategy handed me the preliminary royalty statement. I opened it. My cut for the first 60 days, $1.8 million. I ran my thumb over the number, feeling the weight of it. Not the money, the proof. They had tried to humiliate me. They had tried to strip everything away. And now all they had left were the consequences of believing I was small. The first time I walked into my new lab at North River as Director of Advanced Innovation, I stopped in the doorway and just let myself breathe. Not because of the equipment, though it was better than anything I had ever touched at Solariderm, but because of the feeling, space, respect, air that didn't vibrate with fear or silent resentment. For the first time in years, no one looked up expecting me to justify my existence. No one waited for me to fail. Instead, 3 junior chemists straightened the moment they saw me, eager, curious, ready to listen. That simple shift, people actually valuing what I brought to the table, felt more powerful than the wire transfer, the court ruling, or even the headlines. This was what I had been working toward without even realizing it. I moved between the stations, observing mixtures, checking notes, studying early results from our next formulation. It was good work, cleaner and more ambitious than anything I could have achieved in a basement lab with a flickering light. I felt myself settling into a rhythm, not rushed, not cornered, just focused on creation instead of survival. Later that afternoon, Damien invited me to his office overlooking the river. We want to expand your team, he said, clasping his hands on the desk. More staff, more budget, more support. You've proven what you're capable of. It struck me then how different this place was. At Solariderm, competence had been treated like a threat. Here, it was investment fuel. I'll need autonomy, I said, and full decision-making power on R&D direction. Damien nodded without hesitation. Done. When I left his office, a quiet satisfaction unfurled in my chest. Not revenge, not triumph, something steadier. Ownership in the truest sense. That evening, I went home, made tea, and sat by my living room window. The city lights reflected in the glass like small sparks drifting across the skyline. My phone buzzed once, a news alert about Solariderm stock sliding another 12%, but I didn't open it. Their downfall no longer belonged to me. I had started a new chapter, one built on work I created, defended, and finally reclaimed. But as I sat there, I let myself think back to the moment Victor slid that paper across the table. The arrogance, the dismissal, the assumption that I would fold because they believed they owned me. They thought they were cutting my salary. What they really did was cut the last thread tying me to their mediocrity. I leaned back in my chair, letting the warmth of the tea settle through my hands. Tomorrow I'd continue refining our new formulation. One that would make the anti-aging market look prehistoric. One that would solidify North River as an industry powerhouse. One that would ensure no one could ever underestimate me again. They tried to shrink my world to a single insult on a single piece of paper. Instead, they enlarged it. They pushed me toward a life where I didn't just survive, I built, I won. And I finally stepped into the space they were too blind to realize I deserved all along. Sometimes a story like mine reminds me how easy it is to forget our own worth when we've spent years giving everything to a place that only ever took. I didn't leave Solariderm because I suddenly became brave. I left because humiliation has a strange way of pulling the curtain back and showing you the truth you ignored for too long. What I learned is painfully simple. People who benefit from your silence will always expect it to last forever. They count on it. They build entire systems on the hope that you won't look too closely at what you've created or what you're entitled to. But the moment you finally open your eyes, the moment you stop apologizing for taking up space, everything shifts. Not because you decide to fight back loudly, but because you finally understand the power of walking away. My revenge wasn't about destroying anyone. It wasn't about becoming richer or proving that Solariderm had underestimated me. It was about reclaiming the chapters of my life that I had unintentionally handed over to people who didn't value them. And yes, sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife, quieter, cleaner, and far more devastating than rage. The real lesson is knowing the difference. In today's world, especially in the American workplace, too many people stay in jobs that belittle their talent, dismiss their work, or treat them as disposable. You don't need a dramatic courtroom win or $1 million contract to reclaim yourself. You just need clarity, self-respect, and the courage to act before someone else defines your worth for you. How to get started today. Write down what you actually contribute, not what your title says. Read your contracts, agreements, or obligations more carefully than ever before. Identify one boundary you've been avoiding and set it, quietly but firmly. Start researching your options even if you're not ready to move yet. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or quietly pushed aside, tell me your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, please share it, subscribe for more, and help keep these stories alive.